Welcome to the Own Up Podcast with your host, Jennifer Long.
Hi, Jen Long here, and welcome to another episode of the Own Up Podcast, where today I want to talk to you, my fair readers, about conversations with style. And so this is when you are communicating with others, understanding what style is most effective. This is a good understanding of both what your style is, how you tend to communicate and relate with people, as well as what other styles the other people might be to whom you're speaking. Because the best part about understanding those things is you're going to have a better understanding of what your own tendencies are going to be, better self-awareness around what your default modes are so that you can help to mitigate if those things aren't going to be helpful within the context of an accountability conversation. By the same token, it's also important that you connect to the other person. That's why we communicate. And so being able to connect to the other person is understanding what style they prefer to communicate and relate in. Because when you make the effort to meet somebody where they are relative to their style, your ability to actually create connection can happen much easier, much more effectively, and they'll hear you more so than they might if you just show up as yourself in your own style. You'll obviously, if this is a work relationship, it'll be what they expect, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the most effective way, especially, we're talking about accountability conversations, right? So these are things that are meant to close the book on something, turn the page on something, make something better, create an opportunity for someone to amplify and improve how they're currently showing up. So these are, I won't say high stakes conversations, but they're critical conversations because these are the things that are game changers relative to how people show up, perform, do the work, do the job, that whole thing. So so let's just talk about style. And when I say style, what am I talking about? If you're not familiar with communication styles, these things have been around for a very long time and are very, very helpful relative to being more strategic in how you communicate. So some of the assessments, and this is how you find out what style you are, is depending on what kind of assessment you take. And some organizations have these, they use them all the time for other purposes, for onboarding, for team building, for development, that kind of thing. So you're going to have what I use is DISC assessments, right? So there's a whole body of DISC assessments out there on the market. I use the DISC assessment that is owned and produced and managed by Wiley because they have a long history with assessments and they have that kind of sciencey background in terms of being able to authenticate it and that kind of thing. And they own the original DISC science developed by Dr. Marston. But there are a lot of derivative versions of DISC. And so there's DISC assessments that put you in quadrants with animal names, with other kinds of identifiers that speak to what your personality might be, how you like to show up, that kind of thing. Myers-Briggs is another version. And I'm sure Hogan Assessments has some kind of assessment that might tell you your style in this regard as well. There's a bunch. The DISC, which is what I'm going to talk to because that's the one I know, puts you on in a quadrant, right? So there's 4 primary styles, and then based on what your result is, you can bleed into the other styles, and so you can have a little bit of a combination. So DISC, the acronym, so it's DISC. D is dominant, I is influence, S is steadiness, and C is conscientiousness. And that's where DISC comes from relative to the title. The reason I like to use DISC is because I think 4 letters is easier to remember than 6 or 8 or 12 or 15, depending on your instrument. And it's fairly straightforward to kind of try and do recall on. And that's really the whole point is how many assessments have you taken as an executive or a professional, and you get your report and you're like, yeah, that's great. And then you put it in your desk and you never see it again. Because it's the easier it is to remember, the easier it is going to be to utilize if you're going to put it into the context of having an effective conversation. And that's the whole point here. And so I want to frame this up in how you marry this into being more effective when you're having a conversation. If I am your boss and I have a dominant style, and a dominant style is all around kind of focusing on immediate results and wanting to take action. And I tend to be in a place of challenge. I will challenge others. Why do you want to do that? Well, how is that going to be more important in this? So the dominant style tends to be where a lot of managers and leaders in organizations, especially in Western culture, tend to live, because that's the kind of thing that we focus on and see as leadership, right? That these people are driven, they're a little bit more competitive, and they're willing to cut to the chase and tell you like it is, that kind of thing. So when I'm leading, those all may be very fabulous things, but when I'm trying to hold you accountable, coming up at that level may be off-putting. It may shut you down. It may make you defensive, those kinds of things. And so it's important for me to understand what the net impact. I might have all the right intentions, but not the right impact. If I'm unaware that I'm coming off that way, especially if I need you to take ownership and accountability for something. So if I'm going to speak to, it helps if I know what you are, right? The whole idea of understanding who I am is so that I can understand how much versatility, because I got to understand there's 3 other styles out there that I'm going to have to communicate and relate to. And if I'm going to be effective, my ability to be versatile there is what's more important. And so if I am in conversation with, say, an S, as someone who lives in the steadiness quadrant, S's tend to be a little bit more on the supportive side. They're much more cautious. They're much more reflective. They like to collaborate, and they really like stability. And so S's tend to be a little bit more laid back in the room. And so they're very, very different to a D. So if I'm going to confront an S, because this has been an ongoing issue and I've ignored it, and now I'm at that line of enough, the best thing for me to do is not show up as a D, because that immediately will make the other person defensive, shut down, protective, that kind of thing. Because an S is motivated by cooperation. An S is motivated by an opportunity to help. And if I come in with, this is all screwed up and I'm not sure what you were doing, and you need to look at this because this is super important and you're not delivering what I'm expecting, that's not going to go over really, really well. Versus if I understand I'm dealing with an S and I've got an unmet expectation, and maybe we should use an example to make this a little bit simpler to understand. Maybe they're missing a deadline, right? Maybe they're consistently missing a deadline. It's better for me to go in and say, I'm concerned about the deadline that you keep missing. I need your help. I'm looking for your support on delivering relative to this expectation, and give them the why. Here's the context. Here's the purpose of what's going on. And here's the impact that you're creating when you miss this deadline. Tell me what's going on. That's going to be a much more acceptable experience for the S, to actually hear what you're trying to tell them and to generate dialogue, because accountability conversations are not just the downloading of a bunch of information about what's going on and what's wrong and what needs to get fixed. It's a conversation of ownership. which means it's a dialogue. And I want to understand where they are. Do they own that? Do they not own that? And if they own that, then what do they want to do with that? So don't set up a barrier by virtue of not being aware of who you're talking to, right? So another example, your C, your conscientiousness, they're all about accuracy. It's things being right, things being wrong. And so they hate being wrong. They hate getting it wrong. And so when a C gets something wrong, chances of them taking that a little bit personally are going to be high. They're afraid of being criticized. They don't like being wrong, and they're much more motivated around the opportunity to quality, right? To generate quality, to share their knowledge, that kind of thing. And so if I'm going to approach a C, I'm going to talk to them about something around those things, because starting the conversation in that frame of mind versus my own, again, knocks down those barriers to entry for someone to not be defensive and to engage in a conversation and to take ownership. This is the nature of what style in the conversation is. So when you think about holding people accountable, and if you're reading my book and you're focused on the 6 ownership steps, the rehearsal phase, step 4, is right before you engage the conversation. And this is where you'd want to start to really kind of rehearse with and role play with an understanding of what is their style and what can I expect based on how I want to put my issue on the table. So this is what I'm talking about when I say conversations with style. It's one thing to master the steps for an accountability conversation and to actually get it on the table and engage in dialogue. But if you're going to do it at a higher and more effective level, always do it with an understanding of conversational style. And when you're the person bringing the issue to the table, you need to meet the other person where they are. So you're always going to be the person who's going to flex into the other style. And you don't have to just maintain it when you engage the initial part of the conversation. Once you bring them into the dialogue, you got to stay there. Stay there as long as you can, all the way through any kind of ownership statements and solution building that comes out of that. It's important because that's the connection you're building. At any given point, you go to your own style, you turn into who you are, you run that risk of losing connection based on the stakes, the intensity, et cetera, how long you've known them, the power dynamic, all that kind of thing are going to play in there as well. But that's what the rehearsal, step 4, is all about. Thinking that through, feeling it out. We're usually holding people accountable who work with us on a regular basis, who know us, who we know. And so our ability to understand how they might respond is going to be much better. And so using a style format is going to add value and make you more effective when you practice these 6 ownership steps. So what if they don't know their style? How are they going to know their style? And so I would love for you to know what style you are. So go to own-up.com/disc, DISC, and you can watch a little video, learn a little bit more about it, and then let us know if you want to take one. And we will be happy to oblige, and you can get on there, figure out what style you are, and learn a little bit more about your style and all the styles so that you can be more effective at your accountability conversations and connecting to people and meeting them where they are. So that's pretty much it. I'm giving you a style guide, helping you understand how to be more effective, and I will give you some more tips and tricks in another podcast. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Own Up podcast. To get more information about Own Up, go to own-up.com. That's own-up.com. To get more information about Jennifer, please go to her website at jennifertlong.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe in your favorite podcast player. Thanks for listening.